Hello, and welcome to the Pragmatic Product Chat series, where we tackle the biggest challenges facing today's product management, product marketing, and other market and data-driven professionals with some of the best minds in the industry. I'm Rebecca Calageris for Pragmatic Institute and your host for this episode. Today, as part of our pricing month here at Pragmatic, we have a really great guest on the show, Mark Boundy. He is the founder of Boundy Consulting, and he's also got a background in sales and sales sort of enablement, but also in products. I think he brings a really interesting perspective here because one of the things that we've talked about on the show before is that like the most successful products are straight out the ones that sell the most. And that means they deliver the most value, or at least that the buyers perceive they do. So, of course, it's value that drives willingness to pay, and willingness to pay that drives pricing. And I think one of the things that Mark says is that growing more profitable companies from the customer in and your value up just fits so well with what we talk about here. So I'm extremely excited to have you on, Mark. Thanks for coming.
Becca, thanks for having me. I love this topic. I believe that companies exist. And if you're a product manager, your product exists to deliver more perceived customer value than it costs you to deliver.
Yes.
That's the only reason any business exists. And within that, if you're the product manager, you are at the kernel of that. And that was kind of wordy, right? Exists to provide more perceived customer value, priceable perceived customer value than it costs you to produce. So there's a lot of words in there and it gets complex, but every one of those words was in there for a reason. And we could have almost a full podcast on why every one of those words was in there.
I love it though. I mean, I loved every piece of that, right? And so we may just talk about all of those pieces because we always talk about pricing, and pricing cost doesn't matter. But as you say, it does matter as to whether you want to build the product or be in this business. So it certainly has its own spot. But before we dig, and actually that could be just the great backbone, but I do always like to start sort of with your origin story, right? Like, how did you get where you are today? And why are you so passionate about value?
I thank you for asking. My first big boy job was as a product manager at a company that was maniacal about customer perceived value in a way that in my consulting with hundreds of companies and contact with salespeople from thousands of companies, nobody has ever matched. So I had, at the beginning of my career, I had these value goggles installed in my eyes and my brain it was a really unique experience. And as I talked to other alumni of that company, we've all left 25 and 30 years ago and some less than that. But we all said that experience was such a professional gift to me and my career. I see things as a result of having worked there that nobody else sees. And I believe that value is the center of the business universe. Value is, if you're a physicist and you've heard of the theory of everything, one theory that explains why everything in the world happens the way it does, value is the business theory of everything.
Nice. Yeah. It's interesting too, because we have another guest on, Mark's diving quite a bit, and he also talks about value, in pragmatic terms. We think of value as the problems we're solving, right? Which is part of it, I think. But it is like when we think about it, we're like, okay, we need to solve problems for buyers, and that's how we're going to deliver value. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yes. All right. So you said something that reminds me of something that's really important. If you've got a couple thousand listeners of your podcast, if I get 20 executives at the same company in the room and I tell them to grab a sheet of paper and write your definition of value down and hand them forward to me, 20 executives will provide me about 25 different definitions of value.
I think some of them can't even agree amongst them or themselves.
Right? And so if value is the most important thing in our company, but what I described in my brain when I say the word value is different than what you envision in your brain when you hear it, we have no hope as an organization. So consistent definition sounds wonky, sounds pedantic, but it's super important. So I want to help your audience understand the definition of value.
Please.
If you're a business and a product person, here's the definition of value. Remember, your customers do not buy your product or service. What they buy is their own outcome, usually for their own different reasons. So value has to be about the outcome that they're buying. So value is the desirability of the outcome your customer perceives that they are going to achieve when they do business with you. So our marketing, our sales, our product definitions, everything we do has to be termed in the customer's brain language, which is not our product, our features, what we do, but in terms of the customer outcome achieved.
And I think that's so critical, right? What is the outcome? What is the when we have a problem and they solve it, what does that look like? What does that feel like? What does that enable? What metric is it moving? Is all part of that.
Yeah. And you and I have a mutual friend that defines value as what a customer will pay. And that's also true. And it's much punchier than my clumsy definition, but it's not instructive and it's not actionable. So as much as I love the punchy definition, when I want to work with a client and my client wants to have some consistency inside, let's not, because there's so many things that go into what a customer will pay. Let's say it's the customer's perceived result of that outcome.
And I think one of the things, and it was interesting because even when you talked about like sort of your deliver more perceived customer value, right? Like perception is in there every single time. And I think
value,
and it breaks product managers' hearts, right? Because we're like, we deliver this value. And why don't they see it? If only they could see it, then they'd pay me $1 bazillion, Mark.
What you said doesn't matter.
Nope.
I worked so long with salespeople and I told them your commission has nothing to do with what you said. You only get paid for what the customer thought when you said it. Value only exists in your customer's mind. So when you say, I created value, you're fooling yourself. I said something that I hope created value, but I don't know if any value took root between my customers' ears. I don't know what that value looks like, how much it was, what it looks like, until I ask them questions that kind of say, what just happened to you? What did you just think when I said that?
Yeah.
How much value is there? Only exists in your customer's mind. And so it's really easy for us in business. My new book, The Infinity Effect, it talks about the most important process in your company, and your B2B customers really get this because the customer's journey, it starts with, I realize status quo isn't what it should be. I try to understand all why and the implications. Now I'm going to figure out what I might be able to do about it. Then I figure out what are the options. Then I pick one option. Then I pull the trigger. That is one half. Well, it's one half. We'll be generous and call it one half of the customer's journey, which is buy. Then after they pull the trigger, they implement it. They install it. They write the SOPs around it. They master it. They measure the results. And then they figure out, what else can I do with this? Or should I renew? That's the own side of an infinite loop. And they go infinitely in B2B from buy to own to buy more or buy different which is buy to own to buy to own. The only reason your customers exist, put up with you and your salespeople during that buy process, the only reason they tolerate your presence, the only reason they tolerate your interruption is in the promise of achieving an outcome over on the own side of that journey. Never forget that process, that own, buy, own, buy, own, buy, own, is the reason your company exists. It's the reason your product exists. The most important process, that own, buy process, happens outside of your company. The most important process in your company happens outside your company. And that's frustrating. And so when, as you said, when somebody says, oh, I told them this value, I create this value, maybe you did, maybe you didn't. Business is an art, and product management is an art practiced between your customers' ears.
So then, as a product manager, what does this mean to me? Like, I mean, I know what it means, but what do I do differently? How do I help have this conversation? Like, how do I help deliver value that the customers can perceive?
Yes. Okay. So first of all, I can say this with confidence, 95% of any business-to-business marketing gives with the basic narrative, we are this company, this is what we do, this is what we do, this is how we're different, this is what we do, this is what we do, we do. These are the customers we serve who get to these outcomes. That's bass backwards. Your marketing and your website should start with, you need this outcome, and when you're not getting it, this is what happens to you. Because your customer does not come to your website, does not read your marketing information to find out about you. They tune in, they come to your website to see if they can find themselves reflected back. So if you tell them what you do, you're spitting on what they are there for. So I'm a big fan in the marketing communications about your marketing, your sales, everything has to be translated for the customer into the language of outcomes. We so often say, here's what I do, and I'm the best at this. And we expect our customers to be able to understand our product well enough to translate that for them, for themselves, into their own outcomes. And if you're asking your customers to determine their own outcomes, you're playing Where's Waldo with your own value. You're expecting the customer to do your work for you. And I can guarantee you, they don't do it as well as you do. They don't know your product, your differentiation as well as you do. They don't even know their business as it pertains to their own outcomes as well as you do a lot of the times. The people who you sell to, the 6.8 people on average that you sell your enterprise software to, on the buying team, every one of them is a creature of one silo or another. They understand how their own silo operates. Very few of them really truly understand how each of their own 6.8, 5.8 other silos in the room connects to each other. They don't understand any of the other silos. They don't understand how they connect. That's your job to help them visualize those outcomes. And the marketing people who do that, the sales people who do that, the product communication that turns everything into the language of a customer's outcome is the one that's going to win. And okay, so that's that. But the outcomes that make you commercially successful are the outcomes that you give that none of your competitors give. So that's about differentiation. And so you were correct on your website, kind of. You shouldn't have done it on your website, but you were correct in the thinking of understanding your differentiation. How are you different? So I have a whole exercise that I do with clients where we understand your differentiation and your difference. And then after we've really carefully wordsmithed that differentiation statement to make it sure that it's true, it's measurable, it's objectively true, it's not what marketing said, it's real. This is our difference. As soon as we've done that, I say, all right, time out. What we just did doesn't matter to your customers. They don't care how you're different. What they care about is what they get because you're different. So now let's start an exercise at the top. And so we make a mind map. And at the top of that, of a big flip chart, we put that statement of differentiation. And then we do a mind mapping exercise that says, at my customers, what outcomes derive from that differentiation? When I'm the only one that does this, my customers get this from me better than they can get it from any other vendor. Those are the outcomes that you are the best in the world at delivering. And if you can find people who already want those outcomes, or you can get people, your marketing can get people to want those outcomes, those prospects are your natural customers because they want what only you give. They just don't know that they're your customers yet.
I love that idea of switching from what we do differently to what outcome we deliver differently. Because I also think when we talk about how we prioritize what we want to build in a product, right? We talk about we should build to, I would say it's like Wonder Woman, right? The second X, right? So, it's what we're really good at and what the market values. And this is that, but it's a stronger flip to making sure it's not just what they value, but that it is delivering the outcome. It is delivering I would call it a measurable something, right? Like really focusing on the results we are going to deliver. And that really pulls through in terms of prioritization. It really pulls through in terms of communication. And it really pulls through then to our ability to, I don't want to say justify because that's not the right piece, but when we talk about pricing, right? It is all built on that outcome you value. And because you value it, we can put measurements around it that show real impact.
Yeah. So when you know what outcomes you deliver, now your marketing is better, your sales materials are better. Actually, your product development roadmap gets better because these are the outcomes that make us money. So we want more outcomes like this. And if you come up with a new product feature enhancement and it isn't thematically consistent with that, now you have to ask what outcome does that give? And so it actually helps you develop what I call a product innovation charter. Like these are the kinds of innovations that we make a lot of money with. And these are the ones that are yellow lights. We're not saying don't do them, but if you're doing something outside of this normal expansion of this group of value propositions, this group of outcomes, now we have to understand who cares and why. I'm sorry, it's not a software application, but I worked with a company that made blood testing lab equipment. So when you're in a hospital, you get a little tube of blood drawn, and it goes down to a big machine in the basement. And 20 minutes after that tube gets put into the machine, a printout comes out with 50 different 50 different characteristics of your blood and your blood chemistry. This vendor was just as fast as everybody, and in a few cases was more accurate. And clinicians kind of said, well, yeah, I like the more accuracy. I'm not sure I'll pay for it, but I like it. The lab tech manager said, yeah, I can see that's more accurate, but I'm not going to pay for that because everybody else seems to be accepting the old stuff. And so what happened was we decided to add from our 6.8 buyers to 7.8 buyers. We went to the chief risk officer at the hospital and asked, all right, for this kind of misdiagnosis, how much do you spend in claims every year? And if we can reduce this accuracy, if we can cut that misdiagnosis rate from X% to half of X%, how many dollars does that save you a year? It's an indirect cost, but we had to find an outcome that we uniquely deliver. But now we also actually had to find the person who cared about that outcome. Our normal buying group kind of said they cared about it, but didn't care about it in dollars.
Right. I mean, no one's going to say, I want inaccuracy, but it doesn't matter enough for me to move.
The doctor says, yeah, I like having the pride of knowing that this test is more accurate. I like having more conviction in my diagnosis. But the person who cared is the one who pays the checks when it fails. So you find the person who has a KPI that attaches to that outcome, and suddenly this company's $80,000 price premium became completely insignificant. There's a software story. Company made enterprise software for municipal governments.
Okay.
All right. And one of their software modules was taking all the automated meter readings and turning them into water bills. And this was and this one city that this salesperson was trying to sell to was replacing an old legacy system that was tied together with Band-Aids, duct tape, and two 63-year-old, 64-year-old IT professionals who are going to retire. However, they had agreed for a contract with the city to maintain this antique software. So he was bidding against two contracts, in two consulting contracts, but they only were going to fix 80% of the problem. You were still going to have to hand enter data because they weren't going to manage the entry from the data into the software. They were only going to manage, once the data is in, how to print the bills.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So we said, all right, so you've got the cost of the two contractors, but now you've got an error, you've got the keystroking to enter those. How much does that cost? And now you've got the cost of keystroke errors. What happens there? Well, when there's a keystroke error, somebody gets a bad bill, and then customer service gets a call. And if you don't fix it right away, the city councilman gets a call. And what does that do when a city councilman or the mayor or the city manager has to call in and say, what the heck is going on? What's the cost of that? And so suddenly we added some dollars to that. And suddenly, he was so proud of the fact that he was pricing this thing with $400,000 worth of price premium that he said, I know they're going to try to stick me on price and negotiate that. And so I put $400,000 extra that I could give any of them to get to our standard cost plus pricing model. Well, we found $1.6 million worth of all these different costs. And so he went from, well, I've got this $400,000 price premium fluff in my price that I can give up, to, I'm going to have this conversation to show them $1.6 million.
Yeah. And
then the conversation's going to go, and I'm only charging you $400,000. What are we even here talking about?
Yes. And that, ultimately,
so it was the exact same software. Not one line of code changed in what he was offering. It just changed in how he framed it and who he talked to and how he built the costs up in the customer's mind. Because those questions we asked and found $1.6 million, it was really instructions on how to get him to get the customer to give you those numbers, because his estimates of those numbers were $1.6 million. So when the customer actually gave them, they might have been $1.2 million, right? Because the customer estimates what the customer estimates, and you can argue them up to $1.6 million if you want. But when the customer said $1.2 million and you're going to charge $400,000 for it, is that worth your time?
No, take the win. Take the win.
Take yes for an answer.
Yes. Well, and I really like that story for many, many reasons. But I also, again, I think it demonstrates two important things, right? What we can charge is based on perceived value. That is what buyers exchange money for value, for the value they believe they're going to get, full stop. We also call that in our class sometimes willingness to pay, which, again, but I think not only it's important to understand the value you're delivering in order to set the right price. That is what should drive the price point you set. The second part of that, though, is that your sales team has to believe it as well, because they're the ones who are going, because you were like, the guy started off, he was like, I have $400,000, I could give it up. And we see this all the time with discounts, right? We see sales team members, and part of it is they themselves don't really see how we're delivering the value, which makes it obviously impossible for them to communicate it, right? And so if they also have to understand, there's a you need to understand it to set, but you also have to make sure everyone in the organization understands the value and how to help the customer see.
Yes. And it's with all due respect, when you said the salesperson has to believe it, that's second most important. The sailor has to believe that there's so much value that they ask the customer to quantify it. Value only exists in the customer's mind.
That's true. I mean, the customer matters most, but
right.
If I skip a step.
If the salesperson believes that there's value in this corner of the company, right, to go, if there's enough value that I have to go find the chief risk officer and ask them and get the number from them, the important thing is the number the chief risk officer gives you. The belief in the salesperson is it's worth that personal risk of my being uncomfortable with an entirely new kind of buying role, with an entirely new language and an entirely new title. I have to be confident enough so that when I go to that person, I know that I'm offering them something of value. I'm spending their time and the company's time well. So yes, the salesperson's belief is belief that it's worth the time to go and find where your differentiations has value tentacles that stretch all through your customer's company, especially when you're in enterprise software. And you have to have the faith that you will go out and quantify those. And so the willingness to pay is actually the result of a quantification exercise that you make the customer go through.
Yes.
And so willingness to pay isn't an emotional thing. Willingness to pay is a rational result of a rational thought process that no customer will go through unless you guide them through it. When you guide them through it, it's their numbers. They're fine with it. They will pay it, but they will not do it for themselves. I love another podcast from UT Austin, Two Men on Your Brain, I think it's called, right? It's two psychologists, and they talked about how human beings make buying decisions. And one of the famous quotes, this is from years back, said, human beings find really efficient and sometimes even stupid ways to just get on with it.
Yes.
Right? We just find efficient ways to just get on with it. If it looks like there's more value than price, I'm not going to go through the exercise of quantifying it. And what they will do is say, feels like enough, but it's like your rearview mirror, right? Objects in the mirror are smaller than they appear. If you just ask a customer to estimate it, they will not quantify it nearly as high as if you force them to go through the quantification exercise. And then price is not just a feature of your product. A lot of salespeople think it is. And even a small number, but too many product people say price is just another feature. And so we look at all the features of our product and here's the price. And that's just another feature. It is not. Price is the balance point between your costs and the customer's outcomes. Price is where the demand and the supply lines cross. And you change the demand line by forcing the customer to quantify the outcomes.
The other reason I think this all circles back to something you said earlier, right? So like there would be salespeople and other people listening and being like, but if they're going to buy, if it feels good enough for them, should I just let them? I understand that, right? Why add friction? But one of the other things you said I think is really important, and we talk about the buy-own continuum. Like I'm going to be continuing to make this. A lot of us are SaaS, we're doing renewals, right? So I'm going to buy it and then I have to believe I got the value that we talked about. And that exercise that they would do up front of quantifying the value would be critical because it really helps them see all of the outcomes they're getting, which then they can use as justification for renewals or for own, right? Again, if the hospital had decided to buy the system anyway, but never brought the risk person in, and let's just pretend that this was a renewal thing, right? Then again, it comes to renewal, I wouldn't have taken that in as part of the outcomes and value I got. I wouldn't have thought, oh, and I saved this amount of risk. So that exercise up front not only helps with the first sale, but it helps ensure that there is a positive own cycle, that we are not having the churn problems because we've taught them how to value it.
Rebecca, you said something absolutely brilliant.
Oh, good.
And that is when you have caused a customer to quantify all the value, it turns out that big price premium you charged, they are happier paying that price premium than they would have been if you had not gotten a price premium, you sold at the same price of your competitor and they hadn't quantified it. They are more excited. They are more convinced of the value at a higher price. And then it becomes your customer success and account management team to continually have the responsibility of saying, these are the outcomes that we predicted together. And here's the quantification of, so you quantify your outcome. So at renewal time, the conversation is, you bought this on the presumption that you're going to achieve these outcomes. And here was the break even if we miss the outcomes. And here's the actual outcomes you achieved. We're way above the break even. And sometimes we've exceeded, or sometimes we've fallen short, but we're way over the break even. So we love working with you. Isn't it time to renew? So and price, every dollar in price that you charge, your cost of fulfillment did not change. It's the same engineering support services. It's the same cost. It's the same installation. It's the same number of electrons that go onto a customer's server.
More profit.
It's just every dollar that you charge an additional price is $1 in profit. And when it's $1 in profit that your customer was excited to give you, now at renewal, it's another $1 of profit. Any product manager who has P&L responsibility should do the arithmetic on your P&L, and you will find that the most powerful lever of your profitability by far is price. Now, Fortune 500 companies, which have a much lower than, I understand a lot of your listeners are in software. So there's a very high gross margin on an additional sale. So Fortune 500 has a bunch of industrial companies with lower margins, but the average margin at the Fortune 500 company is about 10-ish%, which means that 1% increase in average price increases bottom line profits by 10 full percent.
It's huge.
0.1% in price gain, 0.1%. If you can just get your salespeople to, on average, stop discounting by just 0.1%, your P&L goes up 10%. There are public companies, CFOs, who will sell their mothers into slavery for 10 basis points.
Yeah, and it wasn't more product work for this, right? This isn't like, oh, we've got to run and get this other piece. It is really a question of positioning, understanding the outcomes, positioning it that way, delivering on it.
When you have those conversations with a customer that quantify your value, and then you sell at a price that reflects that value, they have higher loyalty, higher willingness to pay, higher willingness to renew, and higher willingness to pay upon renewal. And every single one of those things in software, that first year of software doesn't make you any money. We all know that. Right. You spent so much time in cost of sales, cost of implementation. That first year, you made nothing. You only make money if you successfully get that customer to renew.
Yeah.
And the only way you're going to renew anyway is if you promise some outcomes and you deliver those outcomes.
Yeah, that they can see. And I mean, the other thing is, I think sometimes companies, obviously none of our listeners, but some companies feel like if I just get them, they'll see the value and I can get the money in the back end. And like you never make that up, right? Like you never make up what you left on the table. like there is no equation that makes that math make sense, right?
I was in a seminar early in my career called How to Sell to Your Customers at Higher Prices.
Good.
And this was years and years and years ago during a pricing war in the PC industry. So really old example. But the guy said, I pulled up Compaq and I pulled up every PC manufacturer's financial statements and I did the math because they assumed if I drop the price, demand will go up and I'll make it up on volume. And I actually calculated the percentage increase in volume that it takes to make up for these kind of price increases. And you know what? The percentage is just a single digit. A single digit percentage will make it up in volume. Unfortunately, that digit is infinity.
It is. It's such a fear of people, but there's the ISO profit chart. That's like, if I have my margins and I generate and the math doesn't work.
And as a product person, as a salesperson, first of all, give your salespeople compensate your salespeople based on deal profitability.
Yes.
Nope. Do not pass go.
Yes.
Right? Do not let your salespeople be the only department in the entire company that is paid to not care about profitability.
Yes.
Second of all, if you as a salesperson or as a product manager make that kind of a make it up on volume decision, you've just committed your entire company to work harder for the same amount of profit. If you are a public company or hope to be a public company or hope to go through an exit event, a liquidity event of any kind, that decision killed you.
Yeah.
Because that liquidity event or that stock price is, depending on your industry in software, what do you call it? 20 times earnings? Every dollar in profit you gave up is $20 in stock price.
Yeah. It's crazy. And I love what you said because Mark and I have talked about this before, because the organizations get stressed about this idea. Like what you talked about, that for most companies, sales is the only department that is paid not to think about profitability and only think about top line. And switching that brings everybody like going to the same North Stars. It makes them think differently about the deal. But it's so, I don't know if it's anti-intuitive or if it's anti the systems they have in place, but people like it theoretically. And then they're immediately like, but that would never work. And you're like,
the reason it doesn't work is because of a mindset that I really rail against in my new book, The Infinity Effect. And that is, we design organizations silos first and connect the silos with processes. And so the product management silo is product management and has our KPIs based on stuff that happens inside the silo. And anything that connects our silo to the other one, that's out of scope. Geez, that's too hard to measure. So we're not going to use that KPI. We're just going to do KPIs that we can control ourselves in our silo. And over, every single silo. And so it's silos first with inwardly focused KPIs. And I'm saying pitch that thought process and put the customer's infinite loop journey first. And any KPI that propels the customer through a happy loop, faster, higher, better, that KPI is okay. But if you've got a KPI that inhibits that customer getting whatever, pitch that KPI, because you've just measured people to behave the wrong direction. So we do it to ourselves, and sales has a KPI and they say, well, I can sell. That's in my control. And the price that I'm given, that's kind of out of my control. The profitability, I actually had a salesperson once say in public, it's the company's job to make a profit at the price I sold.
Ooh.
And it's bad enough that he thought that, but that he felt that with such conviction that he said it out loud in public. Please, yes, it's revolting, but it was a gift. It was a professional gift to me to hear that is a thought process that lives out in the wild.
You never would have thought someone would be, and yet probably isn't the only person then.
Right? That first job where I was maniacal about customer and value and I was in wire and cable. Think of, is there a more commodity? I was a product manager in wire and cable. I would never take a single piece of business where I couldn't get 20% price premium over the next competitive product. 30% was starting to get good. And my biggest customer that was about a third of my product line was at 10 times the price of the competitor. And that's in wire and cable.
Yeah.
I cannot be convinced that tiny increments in features deliver huge outcomes with huge dollar impacts to my customers. I cannot be convinced. I was just in the Bay Area yesterday, not too far. I had an experience in the little overhead tram from Oakland Airport to the Oakland BART station. It's an elevated tramway that takes you from one to the other. And you look down on one intersection in particular where there's two gasoline stations on different corners of the same intersection. And one day I looked down at the price of gasoline sign and it was 40 cents a gallon different across the street.
Traffic pattern, right?
It's the same gasoline.
Yeah.
And so you ask the question, how does that gas station with the higher price even exist for longer than 15 minutes if we believe in simple price and demand elasticity?
Yeah. Yeah.
How does that even exist? Well, one of them's 2 right-hand turns, one of them's 2 left-hand turns. One's got better coffee in the mornings, one's got cleaner bathrooms. Whatever it is, tiny differences make huge differences to customers.
Yeah. I mean, even that example, that percentage is giant. It's huge.
The gasoline is typically, the lower priced gasoline station was making 3 cents a gallon on gas. The higher price station was making 43 cents a gallon on price because they were paying the same wholesale price for gas because it's the same gas from the same refinery, probably on the same day coming into the different tanks. The only difference is in the Chevron tank, they put, well, Chevron actually has better additives, but if it's Circle K gas, Unocal gas versus Sunoco gas, they dump a little baggie full of additives in that giant container, and it's a Unocal baggie or a Shell baggie, but it's the exact same bulk gasoline with a
I don't think I've ever someone said to me, I pick, Citgo gas because it's the best gas. Like, it's been a long time.
Chevron gas is arguable, is objectively, has a better detergent. The Techron additive is better gas, but nobody else's gas, even though they're branded different, they're the baggie, what's in the baggie is almost identical.
Yeah.
Is indistinguishable. Your car cannot distinguish it.
All right.
And yeah, so don't get me started with understanding. I'm a value pricing hawk. And I cannot be convinced that we cannot find a tiny difference in your product or service that will make your customer a huge amount of value difference that you should be charging for and making money from.
Yep. And you find those customers that value it.
Right. Your product developers are too brilliant and too hardworking to not reward them for their time. And maybe their salary, maybe their comp packages won't change, but their job security will. Their stock options will when you do your job right.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Mark, this was great fun. We talked about lots of different things today. If we could get listeners to do 2 things differently tomorrow, based on what we talked about today, what would it be?
Understand your differentiation. Be very disciplined about it. You can buy my book, either my book, The Infinity Effect or Radical Value, to understand how to really quantify your differentiation and then forget about that and turn that into a listing. Also, chapter 8 of my Radical Value and also in The Infinity Effect, what outcomes should I be talking about to all of my prospects?
Awesome. All right.
Once you do that, then the value pricing becomes pretty easy.
Right. That's what it's all based on. Okay. So you have 2 books. Where can I get the books?
The Big A, Amazon.
Yeah. Cleverly
Radical
enough.
Value or The Infinity Effect. Actually, The Infinity Effect, I actually have the book, 180-ish pages, and I have the 35-page summary of the book.
Oh, like Cliff Notes.
It is the Cliff Notes. So because that book was written for executives and boards of directors to talk about how to change your company into a company that builds everything they do around a customer's outcome rather than around your silo-based, internally focused processes. So your silos and your org chart won't change, but the charter for everybody in the company becomes customer outcome first, not silo KPIs first.
That sounds great.
So because I wrote it for CEOs, I decided, well, they're going to want the summary.
They want that. Yeah.
And if they like it, then they'll expand deeper and get the book.
Perfect. All right. So we will send people there. All right. Thank you, Mark, so much for coming on. It was amazing. Thank you for sharing your experience and your insights.
Rebecca, thanks. Thanks for everybody for letting me bend your ears for this long.
Awesome. All right. That does it for today's episode. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And don't forget to join us next week when we tackle another great topic designed to help you elevate your product, your company, and your career.